This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, I have joining me from the exact opposite side of the planet, Mr. Andrew Nichols.
Hey, Soraya, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm sitting here and it's all wet and hot, and you're in the middle of winter in Australia.
Yeah, which is also quite wet and hot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really wet today, actually. But yes, I'm coming to you from the future on the other side of the planet.
My midnight, your noon.
Mm-hmm.
That actually works out fairly well for me because I'm a night person.
Yeah, and I'm a day person, a morning person, so it's kind of perfect.
Yeah. So we were talking in Patreon a bit, and you said you had a bunch of interesting stories, and some of them sound very, very interesting to me, actually. So do you want?
Yeah, hopefully.
Like how long have you been listening to the show?
Ages now. It was like late 2019, early 2020, I think, when I started listening. And like I was saying before, I mean, it's literally changed my life. It's a thrill to be here, and I'm so grateful because, as I'll probably go on to talk about, I was raised very, very, very strict Catholic. And then when I broke away from the church in my late teens, I pretty much shut down any kind of spiritual or, any vaguely spiritual side of my personality, even though I'd always been super interested in paranormal and supernatural type stuff. In terms of my own personal belief system, I just kind of shut everything down. And then in the COVID pandemic, partly as a result of listening to your show, started up a magical practice, which has kind of taken my whole life and my whole art practice in a completely different direction. And it was purely because of you and your guests, you and Ren Collier in particular, and conversations that you had that set me on that path. So I'm very grateful.
I mean, if you're following Ren and I, it seems like that would be a reckless path.
Well, an enjoyably reckless one.
Okay,
maybe.
All right. I mean, I don't have any complaints about anything that's happened to me, but, I realize we talk about this stuff and be like, this might seem really reckless to most people.
I think, I don't know, especially if you're getting into magical stuff, I think there's got to be a bit of that attitude. Otherwise, you're not going to actually learn how to do it safely. True. So, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I remember one particular conversation. I was already kind of interested in magical stuff. And you kind of, in conversation with Ren, I'm pretty sure, talked about how you were skeptical about it, and then you thought you would try a couple of things, and then they worked, and so you kept doing them. And that, I was like, oh, and I think Ren kind of issued a challenge to people and said, you've got nothing to lose, and we've all got time on our hands, because this was, within the first few weeks of the lockdown. So I tried a few things, and of course they immediately worked, and worked staggeringly well, and continued to do so for a couple of weeks, and then completely stopped, and I had to work really hard to get it back. But yeah, it was, as I said, life-changing.
Good. That's what I want. I want to be able to help people with this stuff, and just as well as making people feel like they're not alone when they have these weird experiences. I mean, the other thing is to encourage people to explore their spirituality, not a particular spirituality, but just to find it within themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what were your earliest experiences?
Yeah, well, not too many when I was a child, but my mother, who is the super Catholic one, my dad's always been an atheist, but mum's very, very Catholic. She is the sixth child of a seventh child, and
Mm.
there's a folkloric tradition in Britain where the seventh child of a seventh child is meant to be a natural born witch or have
Right.
psychic abilities
Right.
or what have you. So mum,
That is the theme of an Iron Maiden record.
oh, seriously?
Yeah, seventh son of a seventh son.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, so mum's always had some kind of, second sight. I guess she's always known when family members were sick or passed away. Like I remember being really young and my brother and myself being called into my parents' bedroom to be told that our grandfather had died overnight. And that was before she'd gotten the phone call, which soon followed. And she worked as a nurse when she was still working and had lots of ghost stories from hospitals she'd worked in. But nothing much, apart from the fact that I was always obsessed by kind of supernatural, paranormal, spooky things. My earliest weird memory is one that for a long time I kind of thought I actually invented and it never really happened. But the more I've thought about it, especially since listening to you, I think there's probably a lot more to it now. And it was it was a UFO encounter, and it's one of the earliest things I can remember, but also my memory's terrible. So I think I was 7, 8, 9 years of age, but I remember it very, very distinctly. And there's kind of a weirdness around it that makes me think it actually probably did happen. And I saw this same thing in the sky twice in the space of 2 or 3 days. The first time I saw it, I remember exactly where I was. I was in the back of the car. My mother was driving. We drive on the left in Australia, so I was on the right-hand side of the car, and we were going to the local shopping mall. I remember the exact intersection where it was, and we pulled up, and it was morning. It's sort of a very cloudy day. There were these very sort of fluffy, low-hanging cumulus clouds in the sky. We pulled up at the traffic lights, and I was looking out the window, and the clouds parted above the intersection, and there was this kind of craft in the sky, and it was a sphere, but it was not kind of a sort of gleaming silver space age type sphere. It looked very kind of industrial. It was all sort of gunmetal grey, different tones of grey, and it looked as though the surface had been kind of riveted together. And it was all bits of metal, lots of different bits of metal stuck together. And I feel like I could see rivets literally holding them together. And it was all right angles, but some of them were square, some were rectangular, some were T-shaped and some were L-shaped, all in this kind of dull gunmetal grey. And I remember very distinctly looking around at the other cars to see if anyone else had noticed it, and no one had. And I still remember being kind of shocked that I was the only person paying attention to it. And I sort of looked back up at it for a couple of seconds, and then the clouds covered it and it was gone. And I don't even remember mentioning it to my parents. But then a couple of days later, I went into the city with my mother. It must have been a Saturday morning, because every Saturday she would go into the city and go shopping. And she was getting money out of a bank machine, and I was waiting for her, and there was a parked car next to me on the pavement. The car was on the road, obviously. And this day was really, really overcast, and the whole sky was white with clouds, and it was so bright. The glare was so bright in the sky that you could barely even look at the sky. But in the window of this parked car, I saw a reflection of the same thing in the sky. And I remember looking up at the sky to try and see it, but it was so bright that I couldn't make anything out. And then I remember looking back at the car window, and again, it's sort of just disappearing into the clouds. So 2 really weird, really brief encounters, both of which were through or in car windows, which feels weird. And for a long time, like I said, I kind of assumed that I just sort of made it up to make myself seem more interesting. But I remember very distinctly the feeling of seeing it, particularly seeing it the second time. And even though I was really young, kind of having a sense that it made sense that I saw it a second time within a couple of days, and having this kind of sense that it was something I was meant to see.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if that's something a 7-year-old kid would think. But also, I don't like children very much, so I'm never around them, so I don't really know how their brains work. But
That's
yeah,
fair.
it sort of felt strangely like it made sense.
Yeah. That sort of just knowing about something.
Yeah. And then something I only remembered recently, or I've sort of always remembered it, the significance of it only struck me recently was I have very distinct memories of trying to draw it afterwards and being really determined to get an accurate drawing of what I saw and being annoyed at myself that I couldn't really capture it. And I think that's kind of interesting because I can't imagine I would have done that if it was something I'd dreamt or something I'd made up. I remember being very determined to try and accurately represent it.
Huh. You still have the drawings?
No. But I remember what they looked like. They weren't very good. It was like a circle with lines in it.
All right. Well, still, I mean, I think that would be interesting to you if you still had them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I wish I did. Maybe they're in a forgotten corner of my parents' house. It could turn up one day.
When did you start writing things down?
Good question. Not super early, but probably maybe in my early 30s, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So like 15 years ago or so. But since then it's been, every time something happens to me, I write it down. So as I was saying before, I've got quite a lot of detail about a lot of these things.
Yeah, you also said it's on a computer that died.
Yeah. Yeah, which of course I didn't back up. I had stuff being saved to the cloud, but was too stingy to pay the $5 a month to make sure that everything went to the cloud, and then my computer died. And the computer was 9 years old, and I was hoping to get it to the 10-year mark before it went into landfill. And I should have actually just bought a new computer when I really needed to.
Yeah, I mean, or just make sure everything gets backed up.
Yeah, more to the point. Now I'm in a very stretched out, long, painful process of working with the data recovery person to try and get things back.
Oh, as long as your hard drive's okay, you should be fine.
Well, this is the issue, is that the computer was so old that it had a removable hard drive. It was a MacBook.
Okay.
So they could actually pull out the hard drive, which was like this long, skinny memory card, but it had kind of gotten a bit fried, so it's not as straightforward. They're trying to get in there now and reconstruct things so that they can access it.
Oh, that sucks.
So it's going to be very expensive.
I have things backed up in multiple places at this point. And even then, I'm kind of like,
now.
And even then, I'm kind of like, is this enough? Like, what if they all fail?
Yeah, and then you end up with cupboards full of external drives, which is what I'm trying to avoid. But yeah, it's going to cost a fortune. So those $5 a month I was putting aside was a bit of a false economy in the end.
I use, and I'll actually recommend this. There's a program called Backblaze that gives you unlimited cloud backup, and it's I don't know how much, it's maybe $10 a month, something like that, and you can back up your entire computer with it. So that is my cloud backup. And then I have local backups. I have 2 computers, so they sync important data between them, and then everything I back stuff up on Blu-ray discs and on external hard drives and stuff like that, just to be extra sure, because a lot of this stuff I'm the only one who has it, like shows I've done and stuff like that. I also like, if you're a patron of this show, you'll get zip files of all the shows, and for every year. And part of that is so to make sure that stuff is out there. If something ever happens to me or something ever happens to my data, other people have it too. So.
Yeah, it's so much work. So much work.
It really is.
I have high-res scans of all of my drawings, and they're enormous. So I kind of that part of my brain gets spent on making sure all my artwork's backed up, and anything that doesn't fall into that category kind of has been a bit fast and loose up to this point, but I'm onto it now.
So you're an artist?
Yes, yeah.
What kind of art do you make?
I do very, very detailed pen and ink drawings, hence all of the very high-res scans that I keep. Yeah. I work in lots of different mediums. I work in ceramics, photography, video. I've been collaborating with musicians and performers in the last couple of years.
Oh, wow.
But it sort of all comes back to drawing, really. And yeah, again, one of those aspects of my life that's now crossed over into my magical practice over the last 5 years or so. So I've been sort of staging big rituals and yeah, I work with a couple of really good friends. We've got a collaboration, one of whom is Louise, who you've interviewed a couple of times now. So we kind of do magical art stuff together as well.
Okay. I mean, it's not surprising that you're an artist and having experiences, because that is a very common denominator.
Well, yeah, and again, like when I first started listening to your show, I would kind of get annoyed when you would all talk about liminality and how the other is connected to liminal times, because in my head I was like, well, life's liminal and
Sure.
everything I do is liminal. And then it was a good several months later in a show, it might have been the Austin Spare show you did, and you sort of said, as a throwaway comment, you were like, oh, yeah, well, artists are liminal. And I was like, oh, duh. Like, yeah, I'd sort of forgotten that I live a really unconventional life, because you're in a bit of a bubble generally as an artist, because you're mixing with other weird people.
Right,
But my life is so liminal. Like I've never owned property. I've never had my license. I've never owned a car. I travel all the time for work. I was calculating a couple of days ago, I've done 14 flights already this year.
Wow.
Like, and I forget that other people actually have a normal, settled existence.
Yeah, so some people have very settled existences that they don't like any kind of interruption to them. And I suspect those people generally don't have tons of experiences unless there's something else going on with them that draws it in. But Jeff Ritzmann, Jeff Ritzmann, that was one of his questions for people, is like, are you an artist? And 90% of the people would be like, well, yeah, I'm not an artist. Yeah. I mean, unless you consider like, me putting other people, like music together from other people. I mean, I'm creative, but I'm not, like, I can't draw. I can't, do the type of stuff you're doing in a million years. But I still always have had a liminal, existence.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. It's, I think, more about creative people rather than artists. And it's like, there's that thing where it goes hand in hand with these types of experiences, and it tends to go hand in hand with mental illness and depression, and it feels like there's a particular kind of sensibility tied up in that just attracts these types of experiences.
And I think it makes it easier for skeptics to dismiss it because of those very things. Well, this person has a mental illness. Of course they had a ghost experience. It's like, that doesn't mean that's why they had a ghost experience. I mean, you're writing it off because of something that may not be the cause of it. Yeah,
but also may be the cause of it, which makes it no less
right, but in a different way than they're suggesting.
Yeah.
Because as I was saying that, I'm thinking, but it is kind of maybe related to the cause of it.
Totally.
But it's like, oh, you have, this mental problem, you're hallucinating. And it's like, or you're looking for attention or something like that. And that's generally not the case. So anyway, experiences. Yes.
So yeah, weird UFO thing. And then very little for the next few years, but I was deeply Catholic during that time. So I certainly had a lot of experiences that at the time I sort of thought of as sort of minor miracles, which now I would class more as synchronicities. But the next, let me see, chronologically, what were the next things that happened? I mean, we went... We had a trip to England when I was a child. My parents won the lottery in the 80s when I was around the same age, sort of 8, 9 years old. And they won 30 grand, which was a lot of money in those days. And it was enough for them to pay off the mortgage and buy a car and take us on a family holiday to England, which is where my people are from originally. And I have some really distinct memories of that, just going to different sites and having really strong reactions, like Iron Age sites and this long barrow called Wayland Smithy, and a bridge in Scotland that's associated with the Fae, which I think you had to ask their permission to cross the bridge or thank them once you cross the bridge. And I was like adamant that we were going to do it because there was no way I was going to cross the bridge without doing it. And then we also did a couple of really epic road trips through my home state, because where I live is the western side of Australia, which is a huge landmass. Yeah. It's the size of Western Europe, basically. This one state, it's about 3.5 times the size of Texas for American listeners. And so we did a couple of huge road trips as kids with the fam, and on one of those, we went to this particular site called Mount Augustus, which is the biggest rock in Australia. So people who are listening might be familiar with Uluru, which used to be called Ayers Rock, which is the big red rock right in the middle of Australia. This site is about 3 or 4 times bigger than that, but it's actually got trees growing on it, so it doesn't sort of have the same visual impact as Uluru. But we basically got what in British culture would be called being pixie-led. We tried to climb, not knowing, which I do now, that you're actually not meant to climb it, because this was the 80s and there wasn't a lot of cross-exchange between traditional Aboriginal owners of Australia and white people like us. But we tried to climb sort of some of the lower slopes, and there was this spot we were trying to get to that was only about 50 meters away, and we kept trying to get to it, and every time, and we could see it right in front of us, every time we ended up suddenly in the wrong spot going downhill again. And we tried for about an hour and then just gave up and went back to the car. But years later, a friend of mine, she's an Aboriginal woman. She's actually Mulgana as her language group, but on her mother's side, the family is Wajari, who are the traditional owners of Mount Augustus. Oh. And I started chatting to her and starting to tell her this story, and I got like half a sentence in and she burst out laughing and she just said, "They didn't let you get up there, did they?" And I was like, "No, they didn't." And yeah, you're not meant to go exploring there. So they didn't let us.
I feel like that would make me more determined.
Not me. I'm not gonna. Yeah, not in this country. The spirits in Australia are very, very, very old, and I'm not going to mess with them.
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily mess with them, but I'd be like sort of asking their permission, like, could you let me get there? You know?
True. Yeah, true. That might work.
But you have to know about it in order to do it.
Yeah, which thankfully there's a lot more knowledge exchange around that type of thing now. And like Uluru, for example, you're not allowed to climb anymore. Which is a great thing because it was terrible ecologically as well as spiritually that horrible backpackers were dragging themselves up that rock and down again 100 times a day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so all through childhood, that was kind of it. But the next really cool thing that happened was when I was in high school, and this was a kind of ghost in inverted commas poltergeist type experience. But I think I was the poltergeist. I had a really amazing history teacher when I was in senior years of high school. And I mean, this sounds like a sort of 80s teen drama, but he sort of made history fun and would kind of give us really intriguing assignments. And he was just really fun to be in a classroom with and really did a lot to instill a love of history that's really important to me in my art practice. And one of the things he did, which is hilarious for a super Catholic school, and I'm sure you wouldn't be allowed to do it today, is that one of the girls in my class, her parents had recently bought an old heritage-listed pub and hotel, in a little country town about an hour and a half out of Perth, where I live. And they were in the process of renovating this hotel to turn it back into a working hotel, but it was meant to be haunted. So he took us all on an overnight excursion to go to this hotel and go ghost hunting for our history class. And so we all drove out there one day, and it was a class of about probably 20 or 25 kids and our teacher. And we got there and all got together in the kitchen, and they kind of gave us a bit of an induction, and we all got to pick our rooms in this particular wing of the hotel, and they sort of filled us in on the ghost and what it was meant to do. And it kind of has all the cliched ingredients for a ghost story. They were renovating the hotel, of course, which is meant to kick things off. There was a well in the bottom of the building in the basement, so there was like fresh running water on site. And the story with the ghost, she'd either been murdered on her wedding night by her new husband, or she'd been left at the altar and killed herself on her wedding night. It was like a very urban legendy cliche ghost story.
Yeah.
But she apparently hated the color green, and the workmen who were renovating the building apparently had a green plastic bucket. And one of the stories was wherever they'd left the bucket, when they came into work first thing the next morning, they'd always find it floating in the bottom of the well. And the ghost was known for, like, she wasn't a malicious entity. She was quite playful, and she was known for pranking guests and playing practical jokes. So she was particularly known for locking guests in their rooms. And she'd do things like people would be in the shower and then the lights would all get switched off and they'd have to stumble in the dark and covered in, naked and wet to turn the lights back on. And these were all stories that allegedly had been reported to the hotel reception. So they filled us in on all of that. And there were also a couple of weird things they told us that just kind of added to the heightened atmosphere of the place. Like in our wing of the hotel, there was one room that was locked, and they kind of said to us that there was this old man who lived there and he was a permanent resident, and that we had to be careful not to disturb him. And you could hear a TV inside the room, but we were there for over a 24-hour period. We never saw him. And it was individual bedrooms, but then a shared bathroom. So that was kind of a bit weird and unsettling. And they had this really friendly dog, and they kind of said to us, the dog's really adorable, but the minute the sun sets, he turns into an attack dog and you can't go near him. Mm. And that was probably just to stop us sneaking out during the night and running around town causing mayhem. But
right.
Again, it just sort of gave it more of a frisson of kind of strangeness. So we all had lunch and they filled us in on the history of the building and the ghost. And then I think we spent the afternoon just wandering around town, because it was in this little agricultural town called Tujay, which is a really beautiful old community. And then we came back for dinner, and then we sort of all ended up having this impromptu sort of class in the hallway that all of our rooms were off. And the teacher was in the middle of the hallway. So half of us were on one side of him facing in one direction toward the main hotel building with the doorway into this wing. And the others were down the other end of the hallway facing toward us. I was facing back toward the main building. And the teacher's just talking about, history. And then those of us who were facing the main building saw this figure cross the doorway at the end of the hallway. And it kind of looked like a person wearing a white gown, like a sort of wedding gown. So mayhem ensued, and there was sort of a lot of shouting and screaming. We all ran down the hallway and, of course, couldn't find anyone. But that one, I think, was actually set up by our teacher. I think he was in cahoots with the hotel owners and wanted to just give us all a bit of a jump scare because there was a smugness around him and kind of a twinkle in his eye as it happened. And he was very nonchalant about it and looked really pleased with himself. But it was all very exciting, and we were all riled up by then, and it was time to go to bed. So I was in a room with 4 of my good friends who were all girls. But I think even though I wasn't sort of out as a gay person in high school, I think it was pretty clear to everyone that it was fine for me to share a room with 4 teenage girls. No one was bothered. And so we all went to our rooms to get ready for bed. And my bed was kind of next to the door of the room. So we went into the room and we were starting to get undressed, and I went to shut the door just to give us a bit of privacy. And it was a big, heavy wooden door, and I had to lean over my bed to push it shut. And as I was pushing it, I sort of realized as I was doing it that because of the angle I was having to lean over at, I hadn't pushed it hard enough to actually get it to close, which was annoying because I had to walk around the bed to shut it properly. All this is happening in the space of like a second and a half. Mm-hmm. But I start walking around the bed, but I'm looking at the door because I'm going to go and close it. And because I'd pushed it but not hard enough, I was watching it and it was sort of half closing, but it was getting slower and slower and slower. And I'm walking around the bed to where I can see into the hallway as well by now, and watching the door, and I saw it get slower and slower and slower and then stop. And just after it stopped, out of the blue, it slammed shut, and I could see it. I was staring directly at it, and like I say, I could see into the hallway as well, so I knew there was no one there. So I ran up to the door, and of course it's locked shut. And so we were already riled up, and by now we're hysterical, but we weren't actually scared. We thought it was hilarious. And in particular, I was thrilled because I'd gone there desperately hoping to encounter the ghost. But we started yelling out for the rest of the group. And then we could hear the other students on the other side of the door. And then we could hear our teacher, and he was freaked. And again, this is why I think the thing we saw earlier in the evening was a setup. Because this time around, he was really freaked. And the poor guy must have been thinking, oh my God, I've traumatized these kids. Their parents are going to complain. But we were having a blast. We were in hysterics inside. But the door was completely locked. And they were banging on the outside, and we were sort of trying to wrench it open on the inside. And I mean, the reason I think probably it was actually just us creating a little mini poltergeist is, I mean, apart from the fact that we were all teenage kids who were already quite overly excited.
Yeah.
After about 5 minutes, I ended up saying out loud something along the lines of, okay, Mrs. Ghost, you've had your fun, but actually we all need to get ready for bed now. So can you please open the door? And immediately the door clicked open. And yeah, we were face to face with a very freaked out looking teacher. And then, so then we all kind of settled down and went to sleep. And I don't think anything else too dramatic happened overnight, but it was, I know the whole atmosphere was odd. I remember getting up in the middle of the night and it was really, really hot in the building, which was odd because it wasn't a hot time of year. And kind of everyone reported getting up in the middle of the night and wandering around, but no one remembered anyone else doing it. But nothing else too dramatic happened. But the postscript to that, two postscripts, one of which is the next day when we were getting ready to leave, I purposefully left a bag in the room so I'd have an excuse to go back on my own and see if anything else would happen.
Nice.
And I went back to the room and had a proper look at the door, and something none of us had quite clocked the night before is that running through the doorway into the hallway was like an old, like heavy rubberized extension lead, like one of those old 1970s, 1980s thick extension cords. And it was so thick that I couldn't actually get the door to sit flush in the frame at all, let alone stay shut. So that was kind of interesting. Like with all my strength, I couldn't actually get the door to close. So that was kind of cool. And then 2 years after we were there, more or less, apparently the hotel burnt to the ground, which is awful for my classmates' family. But, you know, was that the ghost? Who can say?
Yeah. What was the reason that they gave for the fire?
I can't remember. No idea. It must have been within a year, because I think that excursion I would have been year 11, and it must have been the following year when I was in my senior year.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think no idea.
All right, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Because usually they'll chalk it up to something, electrical fire. Yeah.
I'm sure they did, but I guess if I ever knew it, it's not in my head anymore.
Understandable. It was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. It certainly was.
I mean, it was interesting. I've said many times on the show that, like, after my massive Kundalini awakening, like my memory got kind of Swiss cheesed, and I just came across an article talking about how your memory shifts when you hit certain ages, basically, like when you first go out on your own, memories prior to that tend to become less important to you. So you don't intentionally do it, but your body as a survival mechanism goes, well, I can't rely on my caretakers anymore. So now now it's going to prioritize the memories you make on your own over the memories you made growing up. And
that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, if that was sort of like what an Aboriginal culture would do as a coming of age type of thing. Even though mine was a Kundalini experience, it may have put me in that same sort of thing where my body's like, okay, now the memories from here on are more important than the memories before this. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like I'm reading that going, I mean, this actually feels like that might be what happened. Like I shifted, priorities in a way.
I mean, it would make sense for a Kundalini awakening that your brain would have more important things to focus on.
Yeah, true. Anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you there, but I literally just discovered that this week and was fascinated by it.
It might explain why I barely remember anything longer than 3 years ago.
It's uncommon for people to remember, I guess, like, it's not that the memories aren't there, but it's uncommon for people to recall memories up to like 3 years old. after that, it's usually scattered remnants of memories. And I've talked about having like false memories because my mom described something to me that happened, and I could see it in my head, but I realize I'm looking at it from a third person's view, and I'm not actually remembering it. So they actually talk about that in the article, and I'm going, yeah, no, I know what that's like, you know. And yeah, after a certain point, you start losing those early memories.
I have practically none, which again is why I try and write stuff down the minute it happens to me now.
Not only that, but I think also living a liminal life, you have a lot more data coming in all the time.
Yeah, very probably.
Because I mean, if you're working a 9-to-5 job and you're basically doing the same thing every day, your brain isn't recording that much novel information. But if you're an artist and you're going out and doing different things every day, you're having more novel experiences, which means your brain has more to remember.
True.
I mean, it's a theory.
Yeah,
anyway.
true. No, I think that's true, and probably means that, you're also experiencing time very differently. Like time goes past a lot slower.
Yeah. Because that's the thing. I don't think, people will say, well, time passes faster when you get older, and I think it's just that you're only remembering the novel stuff. So it seems like, oh, yeah, that was like yesterday because you didn't do anything all that novel in the time in between.
Yeah.
So anyway, continue.
Sure. So again, then not a lot really happened. Well, actually, no, then I went to art school, and then the kind of the big thing happened in Indonesia, but maybe I'll go vaguely chronologically, but I might just stick with ghost stories for now.
Okay.
Ghost in inverted commas, given, as you've said many times, we don't actually know what ghosts are.
Right.
But I've certainly had a lot of small kind of experiences and encounters with things that may or may not be the spirits of deceased persons or some other kind of consciousness. And I've always occasionally seen things that I think of as spirits, or occasionally maybe sort of, I don't know, elementals, whatever an elemental may be. But certainly in my early 20s, I moved out and was living with my then partner. And we were in a house that had a bit of a strange feeling to it. And the front of the house was an old by Western Australian standards, like 1930s workers' cottage. But it had a newer extension at the back that was like an open plan kitchen dining room space. So when you were standing by the dining room table, you could look back into the older part of the house through the lounge room doorway. So you could see a little bit of the lounge room and half the couch, but nothing else. And I was out there one day and looked back and saw an elbow, just the edge of an elbow, but it looked as though someone was sitting at the other end of the couch that I couldn't see, drinking a cup of tea and lifting their arm up to their mouth, and I just caught the edge of their arm and their elbow. And and at the same time as I saw the elbow, often we'd be sitting in the lounge room and hear banging and knocking around in the kitchen, which was just, through that same doorway. And the hallway of that house, again, liminal spaces, but the hallway always had a really weird feeling to it. And in our bedroom, both of us we would both get really creeped out at night. Sleeping in our bed, we both felt very strongly that we were being watched from the doorway into the hall. Not in a super sinister way, but just a sort of unsettling way. So a good friend of ours at the time, her sister had recently gotten married, and for the hen's night, they had organised a psychic, and she had said to us, this woman's amazing, she's got a gift. So we came up with the idea of getting the psychic to come and sort of do a reading of the house. And I'd also, in the lead up to this, I'd curated this project looking at haunted buildings and the idea of hauntings and Western Australia as a post-colonial place. And the way that there are so many old colonial buildings in my home state that they're heritage listed and no one really knows what to do with them, so they end up getting given to the arts and turned into galleries, which is never ideal for a heritage listed building.
Yeah.
So we've got all these galleries here where you can't actually put a nail in the wall, which is super annoying. But I decided to curate a project around this as an excuse to go and spend time in all these haunted buildings. And so the first one of them happened in the about 7 hours drive north of where I live, in this old heritage site. It's actually the third most significant heritage site in Australia because it's a completely, perfectly preserved 1850s township that got abandoned due to really bad flooding. And it's in a very strange part of the world, a very sort of high strangeness place that's had this really strange history, a really sad history. There were Aboriginal massacres there in colonial times, which is not that unusual. That's like all of Australia. But there were these terrible floods in the colonial era that sort of closed down the whole town. There have been ghost lights seen there shooting across the tops of the hills. And there have been some really awful murders there as well. In the 80s, a guy chopped up his friend and his family with an axe. And about a year before I did this project, a girl had gone missing in the dunes, and I think they'd found her body. And it's all coastal flats with hills behind. And it's known for having these trees that grow sideways along the ground because there's this constant, really, really strong sea breeze, this gale blowing constantly. So the trees grow sideways along the ground. So it's a very surreal, peculiar part of the world with a really weird energy. So I'd taken a group of artists up there to make work and respond to it. And nothing too dramatic happened there, but there was definitely a very strange atmosphere. And the accommodation we were in was the old school teacher's quarters. And she was still meant to be there haunting the place. And then the second part of that project was in a building in the port city next to my hometown, Fremantle. I think it's the third oldest building in the state. The oldest is a prison that's still there. The second oldest was the first morgue, and this building was built as an asylum. So go colonialism.
Yeah.
And at one stage, it was known as the most haunted building in the Southern Hemisphere, which I think was maybe hyperbole, but it was very notoriously haunted.
And how do you gauge something like that anyway?
Yeah, exactly. But it certainly had a really checkered past because it was built as an asylum and operated as one for a few decades, I think. Then it became like an unwed mother's home and a home for kind of vagrant women and I guess any single mother or woman with mental illness or woman experiencing poverty who society didn't know what else to do with in the 19th century was scooped up and dumped there. And then it was a midwifery school and it was a US Army depot during World War II. So it's had all these different lives of quite intense emotion taking place in it. So it's hardly surprising that it's meant to be super haunted. Right. And we did that one, we could only be there overnight and did a sleep over there. And lots of weird things happened. But again, nothing too dramatic, but kind of the most exciting thing that happened was the next morning we all got together and compared stories, and pretty much all of us had slept in a room together. One friend and I had tried to sleep in the room that was meant to be the most haunted, which was they used it as a painting studio. And it was a really spooky room because it hadn't been renovated like the rest of the building had. It still, you could look up into the rafters and it wasn't air conditioned. So it would have been way too hot to sleep in there anyway. But a local radio station had a competition there a few months earlier where you won a prize if you were brave enough to spend the night overnight in this room. Nice. And they'd had a security guard posted at the front door. And apparently this person, about an hour after they went to sleep, woke up to the sheets on the bed being ripped off them. And one of the other artists and I tried to sleep in there, and about 20 minutes in, I was like, "No, I'm not brave enough," because I was just lying there waiting for the sheets to be ripped off. So we ended up, all of us in a room together, except for one of the artists, and she was brave enough to sleep in a separate space on her own. So the next morning, my then partner and I were chatting to her, or she came up to us and said, "So have you guys made up yet?" And we were like, "What are you talking about?" And she said that she had heard in the middle of the night, she'd heard two men who she assumed were us having a really, really nasty fight outside her room. And she couldn't quite hear what they were arguing about, but she remembered one of them saying something like, "Oh, I'm going to effing kill him." And for some reason she assumed that was me and my ex. But so that was cool. That was pretty exciting. But after This was at the same time as we were living in the house with the elbow and the weird hallway.
Yeah.
And after that experience, it sort of felt like we'd brought something back with us because the hallway got even weirder. And I remember once I heard knocking on the front door and went and answered it, and no one was there. And 2 or 3 times I would be at the back of the house doing stuff, and then I'd have to go to the front of the house, and the front door would be wide open. And I knew for a fact that I'd shut it and deadlocked it because I'm one of those people who, when I'm in my house, that I keep the outside world out. I close and lock everything.
Right.
And it was a good 2 or 3 times that the door had opened on its own. So again, we decided to get this psychic to come and do a reading of the house. And it was a bit of a train wreck because the friend who organised it kind of forgot to tell her she was there to read the house. So she came expecting to do what she normally did, which was do individual readings for the 3 of us.
Right.
Myself, my then partner, and this friend. And I went first because I was the most excited to talk to the psychic. And actually, my reading was really cool. And she did pick up on a couple of really quite impressive things. Like, my best friend at the time had just moved to Barcelona. And I sat down with this woman and we were sort of chatting. And within about a minute of us starting to chat, out of the blue, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Who's in Barcelona?" And this friend had just moved there. It wasn't like there was a postcard on the fridge or anything. And this is in the days before social media. I don't think even Facebook was around at that stage. So that was impressive. And she knew that my dad's mother, when she first moved to Australia, had moved to Tasmania before she settled in Melbourne, which is where my dad was born. And that was something I didn't know. And then when I saw my dad next, I asked him about it. And I was like, "Your mum didn't ever live in Tasmania?" And he was like, yeah, she moved there when she first left the UK. And I swear that's nothing anyone in my family had ever mentioned to me. And the psychic picked up on that. And she had a couple of other really impressive hits, but also, like, none of that information has ever really benefited me. The one thing she told me, she said I could never do cocaine, which is, probably the one thing I would have quite liked to have had as an option. But she was like, "Oh, when your art career takes off, you're going to be moving in different circles and you'll meet people with access to drugs and never do cocaine." She never explained why. But after we've been chatting for a while, I said to her, "Actually, we actually wanted you to talk about the house rather than us." And so she said she sort of did her thing and closed her eyes and meditated and whatever. But she said to me, "Oh, yeah, there's a couple." She said there's an old Italian couple and they used to live in the house. And she said they're still here and they're really close to the house and they look after it for you, and that's why you've never been broken into. Which was kind of an interesting thing to raise because we hadn't ever had any issues. And this house is kind of right in the middle of the city. And a few months before this woman came to the house, it was an old workers' cottage. It was a semi-detached house. And on our block, there were kind of 3 or 4 or 5 of these identical buildings, semi-detached buildings next to each other, like a whole row of buildings. And all of the courtyards were connected. And a few months earlier, someone had, early one morning, broken into all the houses and jumped over the fence from courtyard to courtyard and broken into the house, gone out, jumped the fence, broken into the next house, every single one of them except our property. And we never did have a break-in. And the psychic said, "They're looking after the house for you. You never need to worry about someone breaking in." And she said, "Yeah, the wife hangs out in the kitchen and the husband sits in the lounge room and she cooks for him." And she said she makes him cups of tea and takes them to him and he sits on the couch and drinks them. And immediately I was like, "Oh my God, it's the elbow." And also the banging and noises we used to hear from the kitchen did sound like someone kind of rooting about in the cupboards and doing things. So that was kind of cool. And then she said to me, she said she buried something in the garden and you can go and look for it. And she said it's not worth any money, but it was something of hers. And she said you can have it. So, of course, the next morning, immediately I was out there digging in the garden and I found 2 silver-plated big serving ladles, which I've kept ever since. And whenever I cook a meal for someone, I always use them. And I like to think that the old Italian nonna is like helping me out in the kitchen and helping me with my cooking.
I mean, that's cool that it's something you can kind of just verify like that.
It was pretty interesting.
Huh.
But yeah, like I said, I mean, none of the information she gave any of us was all that kind of beneficial, but it was still, she definitely was picking up on something.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't sound like she was just cold reading you.
No, and I mean, like I said, the Barcelona thing in particular there was nothing, because I went through the house after she left, looking at everything, trying to figure out how she could have known about Barcelona, and there was nothing I could see.
Oh, that's
yeah.
cool.
So then we were in that house for 5.5 years and had to leave when they sold it, which was heartbreaking because I loved that house. And then we lived for a year in a house around the corner, which we didn't like very much. And then we moved to another place where we stayed for years and years and years. I was there for like 17 and a half years. And that place, when we moved in, was also kind of weird. And the hallway, yet again, had a very peculiar vibe to it. And we'd moved in with a friend of ours who was like 10 years younger than us. And the place had such a weird feeling when we first got there that he ended up crashing at his girlfriend's place every night for the first fortnight. Just because the minute the sun went down, the place started to feel kind of spooky. And the cat we had at the time was freaked the whole sort of first 10 days to 2 weeks that we were there. And he was a very relaxed creature in general. He was a super chilled out animal, but the minute he was in that house, he was on edge. And a really weird thing that happened when we first moved in was we would get woken up every morning by this really strange noise. And it was like, I don't know if you've ever put a pair of sneakers in the washing machine, and when it goes on the spin cycle, they kind of get caught rubbing against each other and you get a kind of rubber on rubber, like sort of noise.
Yeah, okay.
It was that kind of sound, and I would always be deep asleep, and in the very back of my consciousness, I'd start to hear this kind of squeaking noise, and it would rouse me out of sleep, and this happened every day for the first sort of 2 weeks we were in the house, and then just as I was sort of coming to, it would stop, and every time it stopped, I would reach over and grab my phone, and it would be exactly 1 minute before my alarm was scheduled to go off. So I don't know what that was about, but sort of 10 days, 2 weeks into living there, we were kind of over it because it was starting to just get annoying. Our poor housemate was really quite spooked out and the cat was losing his mind. So I said to my partner at the time, I was like, we need to go and talk to whatever it is. And so we went into the hallway and I just had a chat to it and said, look, we've moved in. This is our house now. More than happy to share it with you. But like, you've just got to cut this out because our housemate is a really nice guy and you've completely freaked him out. And the cat's great. You don't need to worry about the cat. The cat's not going to trash the house. But like, we'll need to find a way to live together. So, you know, polite but firm. And sort of said, thank you for letting us move into the house. And, you know, we're not asking you to leave. We're hoping that we can all come to an agreement. And so then we went back into the lounge room, and this is one of the weirdest things that has ever happened to me. And I swear to God, without a word of a lie, it happened. Immediately, we went into the lounge room, sat down. The cat was on the couch. The moment we sat down, the cat looked up, stared into the hallway, jumped down, ran into the hallway, sat right in the middle of the hall, looking up with his head angled up as though he was looking at a person, like at that human height. And he sat there staring into space for about 30 seconds, staring dead up at someone who wasn't there. And then after about half a minute, he turned around, trotted back into the lounge room, jumped up on the couch, curled up, immediately went to sleep, and he was completely fine in the house from that moment on.
Wow.
It was wild. It was a very, very hilarious and cool thing to happen. It was like something out of a film.
Huh. I don't even know what to make of that, other than what it obviously seems like. Huh.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, that noise waking us up was very peculiar.
Yeah. I've heard, and only with my windows open, so I don't know if it's something outside actually causing it that I just can't identify, but it sounds like almost like rubber tires on like wet pavement, like kind of go, "Ooh," but without an engine. And it would be at certain nights. Every once in a while, I'd hear it repeatedly. If I had the window open, I'd be like, what could even make that noise? You know, like, is it weird? Because I don't know what's making it, but maybe there's something that makes that noise that I'm not aware of. But I remember John Keel
Yeah.
writing about like that type of a sound in certain weird areas. And I'm like, okay, is this weird? Like sometimes it's hard to tell. Like sometimes something seems weird and it's not. And other times you think, oh, that's just normal. And then you find out, oh, it's not normal. Okay.
Yeah, well, this weird squeaking noise, I've been like, I always have half an ear open trying to hear it again. And it's been a good, like, almost 20 years now since then, and I've never heard anything like it. I don't know what it was.
Well, we got to take a break. We'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. Some info and a recommendation. So, info. First of all, I want to say Andrew's website, which you'll give at the end of this show, contains a lot of nudity, male nudity to be particular. It is art. It is drawings. But just to be forewarned, there's a lot of that on there. So just figured I'd give that as a warning. He also asked me to give that as a warning. So you'll get his website at the end of the show. And he's a very good artist, but may not be the type of art everyone's into. Anyway, as far as contact info, wheredidtheroadgo.com takes you to everything. There's all kinds of stuff there, every show from the beginning. And all kinds of extra stuff as well. And if you become a patron, then it's only $3 a month, and you get extra content with pretty much every show, plus bonus stuff on top of that. And it's only $3 a month. It also helps me continue doing this. So if you like the show, become a patron, or even just, rate us on whatever you're listening to us on. Share us with your friends that might be interested. Every bit of help is appreciated. As for recommendations, there was one I made last week or so, which was Englewood After Dark, and I finally got far enough into it to say that, yes, it does get paranormal. It started out more true crime-ish, and it becomes very paranormal. And it's a little campy, but it's fun, and I've definitely enjoyed it. I'm not quite done, but I'm almost up to date, and I definitely recommend it. But as far as something new, I'm going to go with a movie called Clown in a Cornfield, and it's just came out. It's a campy slasher that actually made me laugh in a bunch of spots. I mean, it's meant to be a dark comedy as well, but it's rare that comedies actually make me laugh, and this one did. So yeah, I'm going to recommend Clown in a Cornfield. It is gory. It is a slasher film. It's a little bit different. It's not what you expect, and it's fun. So there's my recommendation for this week. Now back to the show. All right, and we are back. And now you can continue with your quite illustrious experience list.
Oh, good. I'm glad you think so. I'm worried. These all feel like really small, little, fairly inconsequential things. But they don't to me because I was there. But I'm glad they're interesting.
No, they're definitely interesting. I mean, it's not every event has to be this big, spectacular thing. Sometimes it's the little ones that are the most interesting, like that weird squeaking sound. Like, that's weird. Like, what is that? Especially when you're getting it consistently right before your alarm goes off. And
the alarm was set for different times over that period as well. It wasn't always the same wake-up time.
That's what I was just going to ask you. So,
but yeah, I can. I'll stay on the ghost in inverted commas track.
Okay.
Around, when was it? This was 2012. I went back to a job that I had worked in previously as a curator for this really weird arts organization. And one of the things that made us weird was we were kind of what they call a small to medium arts organization. So we didn't have a massive budget to work with, but we would take on these very ambitious projects, which made a really kind of dynamic place to work. And when I came back on board, we were delivering arts programming in this really amazing site on the outskirts of Perth called the Midland Railway Workshops. And as the name would suggest, it was this huge, big industrial site where they had built all of the trains and all of the railway infrastructure for Western Australia throughout the 20th century. So it was actually the most intact surviving Edwardian industrial site in the Southern Hemisphere at that time, because it was vast and it was pretty much a self-contained village when it was up and running. There were these huge sheds, these enormous, like 200-meter long industrial sheds, 3 of them, which were big enough to hold trains inside. It had its own powerhouse. There was a huge big pattern shop where they made all of the wooden patterns to build the trains. Every single individual piece of a train was carved in wood and then would be cast in metal, and that was all the wooden patterns were still there. It was this enormous site which was heritage listed, but it was in the process of being developed. And we were there trying to provide like community engagement for it. But it never really worked that well because it was a closed site. It had security guards and a gate to get in. And it was never meant to be that way. There were meant to be people actually building houses and living on the site when we were there, putting artists into the space. But it was still just an empty industrial building, and we had all of these artists in there working, and we lasted there for about 5.5 years.
Wow.
But it just sadly never really took off. But it was a really incredible place to work, and it was super haunted because I know there was a lot of sadness historically around the site. It was operational for 90 years. It was built in the Edwardian era, so in the 1910s or the late 1900s, early 1910s. It closed down in the early 1990s when we got a conservative state government, and they had partly won the election on the promise that they would keep the site open, and then immediately got into government and closed it down and moved all of the manufacturing offshore. So there was a lot of anger and sadness around the site. I believe there were a number of suicides from men who'd worked there as a result of this, because it had been there for so long and people's whole families were tied up in it. There were generations of men who the grandfather and then his son had worked there. So when it closed down in the 90s, there were men working there who were illiterate because they'd never had to go to school or get any kind of training other than learning the trade on site.
Yeah.
And it had that master-apprentice structure to it. But along with that came a really intense culture of bullying and kind of hazing rituals. And it was pretty much an entirely male site. I think there were women who worked serving food there, and there were like secretaries for middle management, but it was like probably 95% men. So there was a lot of kind of macho stuff that went along with that. And of course, it was also a really dangerous site. And there were many, many deaths there over the 90 years it was operational. And I was curating programming for the site, so I did a lot of research into it. And one of the things we were doing out there was we had a workshop of furniture makers, furniture designers working there. And they were all like big burly guys who worked with wood and built furniture. Most of them were in their 20s and 30s. I think a couple of them maybe in their early 40s, but like big blokey men. None of them would work there after dark. Like not one of them ever worked back late. They'd all had weird things happen. One of the projects we did there, we had a choreographer working in the old foundry, which was that was one of the really awful parts of the factory. Like the worst death that I heard about on the site was a guy who was working in the foundry, and he had a whole huge cupola of molten metal upended over himself.
Oh.
But he didn't die until 3 days later in
that's
hospital.
Even worse.
So much worse. So that was the type of stuff that went down in this site. And this choreographer was doing a project in the foundry, which at that stage, it was this huge corrugated tin shed. And they'd ripped up the floor. So the floor was just sand. And he was choreographing this dance piece in there, kind of engaging with the sand floor, and had dancers like rolling in the sand and kicking the sand. But he was working back one night just on his own. And he said that he got hit with this, out of nowhere, he got hit with this blind panic and this sense of hostility. And he just bolted and did not stop running until he was out the front gates.
Oh.
And you'd hear stories like that all the time. And it was a gated site, and they had security guards who, again, were all these big burly guys. And a lot of them were Maori, like indigenous to New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of Maori and Islander people in my home state. A lot of them move over here for the mining industry, and a lot of them then go into the security guard profession, just because as a community of people, the guys tend to be big men with broad shoulders and really masculine guys, which was all very exciting for me working in this site, having all these hot Islander guys wandering around. And I remember I came to the site one morning, and there was this new guy who was like super tall and super buff. And I was like, oh, we are going to be friends. I'll be quite happy to chat to you every morning when I get to work. And But then the next day I came in and he was nowhere to be seen. And the next day I came in and he wasn't there. And eventually I raised it with one of the other security guards. And I was like, where's the new guy? And he said he quit the next morning. He lasted one night.
Wow.
Because one of the things that the security guards had to do was three times a night, they had to go into every building on site. And the site was huge. And there were these 3 sheds that were like 200 meters long, enormous sheds with big sawtooth roofs. And they had like a kind of swipe card, and they'd have to tag on at all these locations throughout the site to prove that they'd been there 3 times a night. And apparently this young guy had gone into one of the sheds, gone all the way to the end of the building, like hundreds of meters away, switched on the lights, looked around, made sure everything was clear, tagged on, turned the lights off, and then went all the way back to the front door, turned around, and the lights had switched themselves back on all the way back at the other end of the shed. And he had to go back, and I don't know what happened then, but yeah, he quit first thing the next morning.
Wow.
So I had a few really interesting things happen in that building. So I'd only gone back to this job. I'd only been in the job about 3 weeks, and we did this huge project out there for a local photography festival. And we put on this huge exhibition of international photography with over 100 photographers. And we worked in one of these big giant sheds and filled it full of cyclone fencing, temporary fencing. And we exhibited all of these hundreds and hundreds of photographs on the fencing, unframed, like pegged with clothesline pegs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an unair-conditioned shed, and it was March. So it was like the middle of we always get one last horrendous heat wave here in March. So every day we were setting up, it was like between 38 and 42 degrees Celsius. We were in this enormous dusty shed, dragging fencing around. It was like horrible, horrible work. I'd only been back in the job about 3 weeks, so I didn't really know any of my colleagues. They were all mad at me because I was making them drag fencing around. And so we'd spent this day getting covered in dust, dragging furniture around, and we stopped for lunch, and we'd ordered pizzas from a local pizza place. And I was standing in the shed eating my pizza, and in the corner of my eye, I saw this black human-shaped silhouette swoop down at me out of the rafters. And like I said before, I did a lot of research over the years. I was working out there about the history of the place, and I never read anything about anyone falling out of the rafters and dying. But also it didn't feel like someone falling. It was a very notable swooping sensation, and quite uncanny and spooky. But I'm used to seeing peculiar things like that. So I was like, oh yeah, whatever, interesting. Didn't mention it to anyone because I didn't really know any of my colleagues that well at this stage. And then found out a couple of days later that one of my other colleagues had seen exactly the same thing in the same building, but on a different occasion. She'd seen it sort of one evening later on that week.
Mm.
And then we sort of launched this big photography festival with a big opening event one evening. One of the international photographers was projecting his photos on a big screen outside, and another one of our colleagues who'd been responsible for setting up the projector, we found out afterwards, had also seen exactly the same swooping figure, but he'd seen it outside while setting up this projector. So he'd had this black silhouette swoop at him out of like the night sky.
Wow. I don't know if that counts as a ghost. I don't know what that counts as.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was a site with a lot of complicated history and energy around it, and it had been empty for like 15 years at this stage. So I don't know. I feel like things just set up home in there that maybe, I think empty buildings kind of attract entities or consciousnesses or just, energies.
Oh, could be, yeah.
And I think, maybe one of them. And while we were setting up for that same show, two of my then colleagues, one of whom went on to become one of my best friends, the two of them were setting up more fencing in the old power station of the site. And they were working late after dark, hanging photographs on fences, and both heard footsteps coming toward them. And then through the doorway of the building, saw a security guard kind of walk up to the doorway and look in and then keep walking. And then both of them at the same time, after a couple of seconds, sort of realized that he was not dressed like the security guards who were on site with us. And he looked like a security guard from like the 1940s or 1950s. And then they were both a bit freaked by then. And then eventually my friend said to our other colleague, "So did you just see that guy?" And our colleague was like, "Yep." And then Molly, my mate, said, "That wasn't a person, was it?" And our other colleague was like, "Nope." And then they just kept working and didn't really mention it again. But they both saw this security guard. But then the really cool thing that happened was a couple of years later, right at the end of when my organization was working out there, and I had coordinated this big curatorial project where it was celebrating the 5th anniversary of us working on the site. And I had commissioned all these artists who had links to that particular eastern side of the city. Each of these artists had been given one of the sites in the building and commissioned to create an artwork in response to it. And we had this big exhibition launch, and it was kind of a last-ditch attempt to try and get the government to invest money in our programming, and it didn't work, sadly. So we kind of knew when this project was coming together that it was going to be a bit of a farewell to the site. And so one of the locations we were working with was called the Element Store, and it was this big shed, and it was not normally part of the building that was used by anyone. And to get to it, you had to go through another building, through the power station, and then out into a kind of a wasteland that had been cleared. So it was just yellow sand. And then there was a concrete walkway, like a pathway leading out to this shed. And it was just a big tin shed with a concrete pathway leading into it. And it had a couple of windows, and it only had one door. So there was only one way to get in or out. And one of the artists I'd commissioned, she was a photographer as well, and she had set it up as a projection booth and was projecting images that she had taken. Sorry, I just need to plug my computer in.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we had this big opening event, and then at the end of the night, this same friend of mine, Molly, who I'd mentioned before, the event finished, and we had to go around just closing up the site and making sure there were no sort of hangers-on who shouldn't have been there, making sure everyone had gone home for the night and switching off lights and that type of thing. So Molly and I are going around, switching lights off, turning things off. So we go out to this shed and we walk through the power station. We're walking across the yard of yellow sand on this concrete path, and we were only about 3 or 4 meters away from the one doorway into this shed. And there was a window facing us. And as we were getting near to the doorway, a black silhouette walked across the window, and it was absolutely clear as day. And we both screamed, and Molly turned around and ran away from the building, and I screamed and ran into the building. Because I was so excited that I was so close to whatever this was. So
Yeah.
I was in the building within like 1 to 2 seconds. And of course, no, it was completely deserted. There was no one in there. But that one was cool because we both saw it and we both saw the same thing.
Yeah.
And then Molly immediately came and joined me in there. And that was probably just about the clearest thing I've ever seen. And most of the, so-called spirits that I've seen, it's just been me on my own seeing them. So that was really cool to have a shared encounter where we both saw exactly the same thing.
Yeah. It just looked like a silhouette?
Yeah, I mean, it was, like I said, the artist was projecting stuff in there, so there was enough light to kind of see. There was background lighting, but it was very dim.
Okay.
So I don't know if it was one of those blacker than black shapes that people often see, or if it was sort of a more something that looked like an actual person. We just saw a silhouette. I feel like we could see a little bit of detail. I think it was like I maybe saw bits of a face and some clothing.
Wow. I think
that was a fun one. I loved working out there. I was very sad when we. Sorry.
I love that you ran in.
I was so excited.
Because that's the type of thing I would do, and people are like, "Why? Why would you do that?" It's like, because I want to see it.
Well, it was so close. I mean, this window was maybe 3-4 meters away from us, so like I knew it was right there.
Yeah. Wow.
So I've seen a few more sort of ghosty things since then, but more just kind of flashes. I sort of tend to get a bit of a flash, and I don't even know if I'm seeing them with my eyes or if it's kind of an image in my head. But yeah, probably nothing overly worth sharing. Oh no, actually, I did. You know how on the one vaguely interesting one is, on those ghost hunting shows where one of the ghost hunters will be like, oh my God, something just ran up on me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never experienced anything particularly like that. And I always put it down to it always seems to happen when they haven't had any activity and they need to kind of
Yeah.
pretend that something's going on. So I've always been quite skeptical about that. But probably about 4 years ago now, I was up in a little town in the northwest of my home state. And it's a beautiful little town, but it's got a very, very complicated and very sad history in some ways. Because it was a place where a lot of Aboriginal people, when they were moved off their traditional country, because of first the pastoral industry and then because of the mining industry, a lot of Aboriginal people from this particular part of the state were moved to this one town, which was not on their traditional homelands. And then that led to generations of really horrible intergenerational trauma and drug and alcohol issues and just social misery, all while a whole bunch of white people were getting extremely, extremely rich by basically raping the resources of their traditional lands.
Yeah.
This town has decades of this very complicated history. It's also an incredibly beautiful, beautiful town, an amazing community, incredible artists based there. But there's a really sad legacy to it. And this particular building where I have this experience, it was the main pub on the main street of this town, which closed down, again, I think about in the 1990s, but throughout the sort of late 20th century when the town was a really difficult place, this pub was, of course, like the center of a lot of that really horrible, miserable history because it was where people got alcohol from.
Yeah, right.
And it was a mining town as well. So it was just, again, this very aggressively male, butch, masculine culture. However, a few years ago, one of the local Aboriginal corporations bought the building. And I think a lot of people were quite shocked that they would buy a site that was so tied up in this very dark history. But from their perspective, they were like, no, this is our town and we're reclaiming it. And they turned it into a cultural centre.
Cool.
And it was a really awesome thing to do. And when I first visited the building after they'd first developed it, the old part of the building at the front, this beautiful Victorian hotel, was already functioning as a cultural centre. But the back section of it was like a 1960s, 1970s bungalow extension. And that hadn't been touched since the building closed down. And it had been like a back bar area. And it had also been like a takeaway liquor shop. So again, very much a part of the really horrible side to the town's history because it was where people would go and buy their grog from. But also, and I don't know this for sure, but I strongly suspect that very possibly during eras of the building's history, it might have been segregated and that the white people could use the nice old building at the front and maybe the Aboriginal people were forced to drink in the back bit. I don't know for sure, but that's kind of the vibes you get from these types of buildings. So the Aboriginal corporation, the people running the corporation who'd just bought this building, they wanted to show us this back bar section because they, at that time, wanted to turn it into a gallery space for their art centre, which sadly never happened. But they let us into the building and I did what I always do when I'm in an old abandoned building. I went off wandering on my own and went exploring. And it wasn't huge. It was sort of maybe the size of a smallish house. It had like 5 or 6 rooms. The front bit of it was kind of set up as a bar. And the back bit was this cluster of rooms, but that was what was used as a cold room when it was a liquor shop. So all the walls and the ceiling of the back part of the building were clad in these kind of polystyrene tiles for insulation. So I went wandering around, didn't kind of see anything, but was trying to put out sort of friendly vibes, sort of saying in my head, you know, I don't mean you any harm, just interested in connecting if anyone's here. Didn't really experience anything. Found some little bats, like 3 little bats in one of the rooms, which was cool because I really like bats. And then I wandered back to the front of the building to meet up with the rest of the group. And we were all standing there chatting away. And out of the blue, one of these polystyrene ceiling tiles above my head suddenly kind of popped or cracked as though someone had put their weight on it, which made no sense because there wasn't really anything above it. And just as that happened, I got this sensation of someone rushing up to me and like screaming in my face.
Wow.
And I got a very strong impression of an Aboriginal man. I don't know, I don't know if that's based on anything, but that's one of the only times I've experienced something very, very aggressive. And it sort of came straight at me, and still, even thinking about it now, I get literally a cold chill down my spine. And it was just kind of there for a couple of seconds, right in my face, and then he was gone. But that was really intense. And luckily, that was our last meeting for the day. So my colleagues and I finished up then, and I was like, can we maybe go to the beach and go for a quick swim? So we went, and I sort of tried to wash off any residual energy in the ocean. But that was kind of an intense little thing that happened.
Yeah, I'd say. All right. Well, we are just about out of time, but you have more stories, so we're going to continue this.
Oh, God, I have so many more.
Is there anywhere people can see your artwork and stuff?
Oh, yeah, please. So I have a website, which also has a lot of my curatorial projects on it. So like that in the Railway Workshop site I mentioned, you can see some photos of that site on there if you scroll down the curatorial section. So that's www.andrewnichols as one word, and it's NICHOLLS.com.au. And then I'm on Instagram as well, at Andrew Nichols Artist as one word. And my little Instagram graphic thing is like a porcelain skull, a blue porcelain skull.
All right, cool. Thank you for joining me for this, and we'll continue, like I said, in a Patreon.
Great.
I want to thank all of my Patreons for their support and help keeping this show alive. It is because of you I can keep doing this, and I thank every single one of you. A special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, Andrew Nichols, Cherry Trapezoid, John Blackburn, Madeline J., Mark Smith, Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Tyler Glimstead, Christine, Abby Allen, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Illuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy incommunicable, Seed Person, The Ghost Story Guys, Corey Nelson, Diane B, Empty K, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, Jay, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L, Laser Printer Jam, Liam Huddock, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K, MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mothman Bren, Automaton, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Varosh K, Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Cherry, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDD Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank all of you so much for the support. There is a lengthy Patreon segment to go with this. I think it might be longer than the show and gets into some pretty crazy stories. So if you're a patron, you'll be getting that soon. And you can become a patron by going to wheredidtheroadgo.com and clicking on the Patreon link, and you can sign up for just $3 a month. All right. Let's see. I wanted to thank a couple of new patrons, too. Arnie Buzzell. Yeah, Arnie Buzzell. And Graham Siri. Welcome, guys. I think you've both been here before, so I assume you liked what you found. And I hope you'll like what you see coming up. And with that, I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.
I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories, is the latest book by Timothy Renner. What compels a person to leave behind society, forsaking family, friends, and the comforts of modern life to live in solitude? The hermits of the 19th and early 20th centuries are as fascinating as they are mysterious. These enigmatic figures often became the focus of public interest, with newspaper stories turning them into local legends, folk heroes, and symbols of a life apart. In I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, you'll discover the extraordinary lives of hermits who defied convention. John Stink, rumored to have died and risen again more than once. William Woodruff, whose long vow of silence followed a broken heart. Brusher Mills, the serpent hunter who sold his own snake oil remedies. And Truman Commodore Downs, who claimed Mars as his homeland. These stories and many more reveal the complex lives of individuals who chose to live apart from the world. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness is available now at Amazon.com or wherever you buy books.